I tried so hard to please.
Elvis Presley's last words will leave you speechless. Most people think Elvis Presley died alone on a bathroom floor. They picture him collapsing without warning, a sudden tragedy that nobody saw coming. They're wrong. Dead wrong. And what he said in those final hours, the words that escaped his lips before the world lost its king, will change everything you thought you knew about the man behind the legend. August 15th, 1977. Graceland sits heavy under the Memphis summer heat, and inside those walls, something terrible is brewing. The mansion that millions dream about visiting feels more like a mausoleum tonight. Elvis knows it. He's known it for weeks, maybe months. The people around him keep smiling, keep nodding, keep pretending everything is fine. But Elvis Presley has been saying goodbye, and nobody wants to listen. Picture this estate at 2 in the morning. The lights are dim, the air conditioning hums against the August humidity, but there's a coldness here that has nothing to do with temperature. Elvis wanders these halls like a ghost rehearsing for his own haunting. He hasn't slept properly in days. His body, once the most famous physique in America, now carries the weight of 1,000 compromises. The pills, the food, the isolation disguised as protection. Every room in Graceland holds a memory of who he used to be, and tonight, those memories feel like accusations. The Memphis Mafia surrounds him, just like always. These are the men who call themselves his friends, his protectors, his brothers. But let's be honest about what they really are. They're satellites locked in orbit around a dying star, too afraid to get close enough to help, too dependent to ever pull away. They see Elvis deteriorating night after night. They watch him swallow handful after handful of medication. They hear him talk about death with increasing frequency. And what do? They nod. They smile. They tell him what he wants to hear and cash their checks every week. This isn't friendship. This is complicity in slow motion. But here's what haunts me about that final night. Elvis wasn't oblivious to what was happening to him. This wasn't a man stumbling blindly toward his own destruction. He was terrified, and he was trying to tell everyone around him that the end was coming. In the weeks leading up to August 16th, Elvis had been having conversations that should have set off alarms throughout that mansion. He talked about his mother Gladys and how he missed her. He talked about whether people would remember him when he was gone. He talked about being tired in a way that went so far beyond physical exhaustion that it should have made everyone in that house stop and really look at him. Nobody did. Or maybe they looked and just couldn't face what they were seeing. At 10:30 that night, Elvis did something strange. He visited his dentist. Think about that for a moment. Who goes to the dentist at 10:30 at night? Some people say he needed work done before his upcoming tour. Others suggest he was seeking medication through yet another avenue. But I think there's something else going on here. I think Elvis Presley was trying to fix things, trying to put himself together in whatever small ways he still could. Like a man straightening his tie before walking into his own funeral. He came back to Graceland after midnight. Ginger Alden, his girlfriend, was there waiting. She was 20 years old, practically a child compared to the 42-year-old king who had lived more life than most people could imagine. They talked that night. Elvis was restless, agitated, unable to settle into anything resembling peace. He played racquetball with his cousin Billy Smith around 4 in the morning, trying to exhaust himself into sleep. But his mind wouldn't stop racing, and his mouth wouldn't stop speaking words that everyone around him would later wish they had taken more seriously. The sun came up on August 16th. Elvis hadn't slept. The tour was supposed to start that evening, a flight to Portland where thousands of fans were already counting down the hours until they'd see their king perform. But Elvis Presley would never board that plane. He would never sing another note. He would never see another sunrise. And in those final hours, as his body began its ultimate betrayal, Elvis spoke words that should have echoed through history. Instead, they were buried, sanitized, rearranged into comfortable narratives that protected everyone except the man who actually said them. But it's what happened after midnight that everyone's been lying about. Because Elvis didn't just die. He tried to tell them. He tried to warn them. And what he said, they buried it with him until now. Ginger Alden was 20 years old, beautiful, naive, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. And she was about to become the last person to see Elvis Presley alive. That fact alone would define the rest of her existence, trapping her in a moment she never asked for and could never escape. The official story goes like this. Sometime around 9 in the morning on August 16th, Elvis told Ginger he couldn't sleep. He said he was going to the bathroom to read. Simple words, ordinary words, the kind of thing anyone might say to their partner in the middle of a restless night. Ginger nodded, rolled over, and went back to sleep. She wouldn't see him alive again. But here's where the story starts to crack. Because those weren't the only words Elvis spoke that night. Not even close. And the people who know what he really said have spent nearly 50 years making sure the full truth stayed locked inside Graceland's walls. Before that final trip to the bathroom, Elvis had been talking, really talking. Billy Smith, his cousin and one of the few people in the Memphis Mafia who genuinely loved him, spent time with Elvis in those early morning hours. Their conversation wasn't casual. Elvis was reflective in a way that felt different from his usual late-night rambling. He talked about being tired, not sleepy tired, soul tired, the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones and makes every breath feel like a negotiation with God. According to those who were present, Elvis said something that should have stopped everyone cold. He talked about being done fighting, fighting his body, fighting his image, fighting the machine that had swallowed the country boy from Tupelo and turned him into a product. These weren't throwaway comments. This was a man describing surrender. A man announcing, whether he fully realized it or not, that he had nothing left to give. But nobody intervened. Nobody called a doctor who wasn't already complicit in his pharmaceutical nightmare. Nobody grabbed him by the shoulders and demanded he get real help. They just listened, nodded, and let the king walk toward his throne one final time. The contradictions in witness testimony are staggering when you examine them closely. Ginger remembers one version of events. Billy Smith remembers another. Other household members recall details that don't align with either account. Some of this is natural. Memory is imperfect, especially memory forged in trauma. But some of these discrepancies feel intentional, strategic, like pieces of a puzzle deliberately scattered so nobody could ever see the complete picture. And then there's the cover-up that happened at lightning speed. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's infamous manager, was already working the phones before the body was cold. The Presley estate moved immediately to control every narrative, every photograph, every word that escaped into the public record. They had decades of practice protecting Elvis from scandal. Death wasn't going to change that. If anything, death made the protection easier. Dead men can't contradict the official story. So what did Elvis Presley really say in his final hours? The sanitized version gives us a man casually mentioning he needed to use the bathroom. The real version, the one pieced together from reluctant witnesses and deathbed confessions over the years, paints something far more tragic. Elvis spoke about his daughter that night, Lisa Marie, 9 years old and sleeping somewhere in that mansion, unaware that her world was about to shatter into a million pieces. Elvis worried about her constantly in those final months. He feared what his fame would do to her. He feared she would inherit not just his money and his name, but his curse. The loneliness, the exploitation, the inability to trust anyone's motives. He talked about wanting to protect her from everything he had become. And when you hear what he said about Lisa Marie, When you understand the weight of those words spoken just hours before his heart gave out, it will absolutely break you. Because Elvis wasn't just predicting his own death that night, he was predicting hers too. Lisa Marie Presley was 9 years old when she lost her father. 9. An age when most children worry about homework and playground friendships. Instead, Lisa Marie walked into a bathroom and found the king of rock and roll face down on the floor, his body already beginning its journey from legend to memory. That image would burn itself into her mind forever, and she would spend the next 45 years carrying something nobody else could understand: the weight of his final message to her. Elvis was consumed with worry about his daughter in those last months. This wasn't casual parental concern. This was obsession bordering on prophecy. He told multiple people within his inner circle that Lisa Marie would never escape what he called the curse of being his child. Think about that language for a moment. Curse, not blessing, not privilege. Elvis Presley looked at his legacy and saw it as something that would haunt his daughter for the rest of her life. He talked about protecting her from the industry, from the vultures who would circle her fortune, from the impossible expectations of carrying his name. Most haunting of all, he talked about protecting her from himself, from becoming him, from inheriting the demons that were slowly killing him night after night in that Memphis mansion. Lisa Marie spent decades in interviews describing a father who seemed to know his time was ending. She recalled moments of unusual tenderness in those final weeks, conversations that felt heavier than a 9-year-old could fully process. Elvis would hold her and say things that only made sense years later, after she had lived enough life to understand what goodbye sounds like when someone lacks the courage to say the actual word. She always believed he knew, and she carried tremendous guilt about not being present in those final hours, not being able to save him, not being enough to make him want to fight harder. January 12, 2023. Lisa Marie Presley collapsed at her home in Calabasas, California. Cardiac arrest. Complications from a surgery she had undergone months earlier. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, but it was already too late. She was 54 years old. Elvis died at 42. Neither of them escaped. Neither of them outran the shadow that had been chasing the Presley bloodline for generations. The parallels are devastating when you lay them side by side. Both died from heart-related failures. Both struggled with the impossible weight of fame. Both watched people around them enable destruction while calling it love. Elvis feared his daughter would repeat his patterns, and in so many ways, she did. Not because she was weak, because the curse he identified was real. Being a Presley meant being consumed. It meant belonging to everyone except yourself. But the prophecy extends even further than Lisa Marie. Her son, Benjamin Keogh, was Elvis's grandson. He had the same face, the same brooding intensity, the same haunted eyes that stared out from a million posters and album covers. In July 2020, Benjamin died by suicide at 27 years old. Lisa Marie never recovered from that loss. How could she? She had watched her father die when she was a child. Now, she buried her own son, continuing a cycle of tragedy that Elvis somehow sensed was coming nearly 50 years earlier. 3 generations of Presleys, all gone too soon, all consumed by a legacy that glittered like gold but cut like glass. Elvis's last words weren't just about his own mortality. They were about everyone who would carry his blood and his burden into the future. He saw what was coming, and he was powerless to stop it. Maybe that's the cruelest part of this entire story. The king of rock and roll could see the future. He just couldn't change it. But there's one more thing, Elvis said that night. Something whispered that wasn't meant for Ginger or his cousins or anyone in the inner circle. It was meant for the world. And it's taken almost 50 years for us to finally understand what he was trying to tell us. Elvis Presley didn't just leave behind music. He didn't just leave behind rhinestone jumpsuits and karate moves and memories of a sneering lip that changed American culture forever. He left behind a warning, a message carved into the final words he ever spoke. And if we're brave enough to really hear it, that message might just save us from making the same mistakes that killed the king. In those last hours at Graceland, Elvis talked about being trapped. Not physically trapped, though the mansion walls certainly felt like a prison by then. He was trapped by something far more insidious. Fame had built a cage around him so gradually that he didn't realize he was locked inside until escape became impossible. Every person who claimed to love him needed something from him. Every smile directed his way came with an agenda attached. The pills weren't just addiction, they were escape attempts. Brief chemical vacations from the exhausting performance of being Elvis Presley 24 hours a day. His final words carried the weight of this realization. He talked about wanting peace, not happiness, not success, not love. Peace. The word itself sounds almost too simple, coming from a man who had achieved everything the American dream promises. But that simplicity reveals the tragedy. Elvis had mansions and Cadillacs and screaming fans on every continent. What he didn't have was a single moment where he could just be. Just exist without expectation. Just breathe without someone counting the breaths and calculating their value. He told people he was tired of fighting, tired of being Elvis. The name that made him immortal had become a weight crushing him into the ground. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw a character he was forced to play. The real Elvis, the kid from Tupelo, who loved his mama and sang gospel in church, had been buried alive inside a glittering sarcophagus of fame. His last words were a confession. He wanted to stop performing. He wanted to be free. He wanted to rest. And here's what breaks my heart. We've watched this same tragedy repeat itself over and over since 1977, and we still haven't learned. Michael Jackson spoke about loneliness and exhaustion in his final days. Prince isolated himself in Paisley Park, surrounded by enablers who watched him struggle. Whitney Houston begged for normalcy while the industry consumed every piece of her soul. They all said similar things at the end. Fame is a coffin you build while still breathing. By the time you realize you're trapped, the lid is already closing. Elvis tried to warn us. His last words weren't just personal confession. They were prophecy for every artist who would follow in his footsteps. We create these icons. We worship them. We demand they perform their identities for our entertainment. And then we act shocked when they shatter under the pressure we applied. Graceland became a shrine after Elvis died. Millions visit every year, walking through rooms frozen in 1977 amber. But shrines don't tell truth. They tell the story that protectors and estates want you to believe. The gift shops sell mythology. The tour guides recite sanitized history. Elvis's real last words, the desperation and fear and exhaustion they contained, have been hidden behind velvet ropes and souvenir pricing. The estate profits from legend. Truth doesn't fit the business model. But if you strip away the jumpsuit and the cape and the sunglasses, something profound emerges. At the end, Elvis Presley was just a scared man from Mississippi who wanted someone to really see him. Not Elvis the pelvis, not the king, just Elvis Aaron Presley, a human being drowning in an ocean of expectation, while surrounded by people too invested in the performance to throw him a lifeline. His final words weren't dramatic. They weren't composed for posterity. They were desperate, confused, heartbreakingly ordinary. A man telling his girlfriend he couldn't sleep. A man telling his cousin he was tired of fighting. A man whispering fears about his daughter's future. These aren't the words of a legend. They're the words of a person. And that's exactly what makes them unforgettable. The king title was always a prison. Elvis never asked for coronation. He just wanted to sing. But we needed him to be more than human, so we made him into something that couldn't survive. His last words are a mirror held up to our obsession with celebrity. They ask uncomfortable questions about what we demand from the people we elevate. They challenge us to see the human behind the icon before it's too late. Elvis Presley's last words weren't meant to leave us speechless. They were meant to make us listen, really listen, to the artists we worship, to the people we love, to the quiet desperation hiding behind bright smiles and perfect performances. Maybe if we had listened to Elvis, really listened, he would have lived to see 50, 60. Maybe he would have held his grandchildren. Instead, we got velvet ropes and souvenir shops, and a warning we still haven't fully heard. Until now. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss what we uncover next. Drop a comment telling me which celebrity's untold final words you want explored. Share this with someone who loves Elvis. And I'll see you in the next one.